Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. As the years tick by in the global struggle against combustible tobacco, what has become clear is that for tobacco control, the goal is no longer to end tobacco-related disease and death, but to end nicotine use entirely. With over 1.3 billion nicotine users worldwide, the question is this goal reasonable? Or are public health officials becoming increasingly untethered from reality? Joining us today is someone with a decidedly strong opinion on that question, Clive Bates, renowned tobacco control policy expert and former director of Action on Smoking and Health UK. Clive, it's great to see you again.
It's great to be back, Brent, always.
Clive, we'll dive into what's happening in Europe and globally in a minute, but I'd like to start first with the United States. We last had you on the show in January 2025, and a lot has happened at the FDA since then, including the tumultuous tenure of former FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. What did you make of all that?
Well, I have to say I was extremely disappointed in Dr. Makary. I read his book, Blind Spots, which I thought was actually rather good. And I thought he was putting himself forward in that book as an iconoclast, someone who would follow the evidence, would challenge orthodoxy, would push back against the health and medical establishment. And when he got his hands on the brief on vapes and safer nicotine products, he did exactly the opposite. He went with the flow. He was very quickly captured by the narratives from Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, John Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Bloomberg groups, the health and medical charities, without really taking a pragmatic view of the role that these safer products could play in reducing death and disease. So I thought we were going to see chapter 13 in his book written as he took on this role, but we saw exactly the opposite. I have to say, I'm glad he's gone. I'm extremely disappointed at the way he used his time. The time was after Brian King in the Center for Tobacco Products. The time was ripe for reform and rethinking what they were doing. As it stands, they've been making everything worse. They have been pumping up by being so restrictive about legal products, they've been pumping up the illicit market, and they've been protecting the cigarette trade. And I do not think they can fix that with tinkering and marginal reform. They need non-marginal reform, and that needs someone other than Makary to see it through.
So were you surprised that the FDA scientific reviewers, in the case of Gloss, had recommended their flavored products, which is like mango and blueberry, yet Marty Makary apparently blocked them?
Well, I was surprised. I'm not surprised by anything anymore, unfortunately. Disappointed, dismayed, but not surprised. I hardly think the scientific evaluators could have done anything else, to be honest. It's a reasonable product, but it also has device access restrictions on it. So you need an app, and you need Bluetooth, and you need an ID to unlock the thing. So it's very, very hard to imagine a lot of kids being able to use that product. And with that cover, the FDA assessors sort of said, well, okay, then this one will let through. So I wasn't surprised that the scientists authorized it. They've taken an extremely risk-averse position there. It's very difficult. I mean, young people will find a way around it, I'm sure, but not that many. It's a very big barrier to do this. The problem is those device access restrictions are incredibly cumbersome for the people we really want to switch, which would tend to be older, low-income smokers, people who don't even have a smartphone, don't necessarily easily upload identity documents into the internet, not knowing what would happen. So I try and think, the elderly people I know, or how would they approach this? And I don't think they'll be buying it. That's the problem with it. So again, it's a case of FDA, perfect is the enemy of the good. They have probably put on the market a flavored product that's almost, in practical terms, unusable except by a few devotees.
Clive, how big of a deal is it for the FDA to have authorized the first flavored vapes, mango and blueberry? You just mentioned that maybe it's not such a big deal.
I don't think it is because it's a very cautious authorization. The products come with this device access restriction, a Bluetooth and an app and everything that requires you to identify yourself, and the product can lock on the product at product level. That's a very big barrier to uptake. So it's very cautious. I don't believe it will sell very widely. I mean, the impact of a flavored product is, how effective is it at getting people to stop smoking or never start, multiplied by the number of people willing to use it. So you could have something that's very effective, but if no one uses it, it's just not that much use. So, it's not in my, I am actually quite disappointed in some ways because it suggests that FDA has imposed this threshold of having device level protection for any flavored product. And that will not work. That will not solve the problem. That will not deal with youth uptake. It will not help adults switch because it's too complicated. So it will create a minor niche market for people who have, techie fascinations, but it won't actually create mass market products.
It's interesting, Clive, that just prior to glass getting its authorization, the FDA had released its draft guidance for the industry on flavored ends pre-market applications. And the title was appended with considerations related to youth. So this draft, I know you've got a bunch that we want to talk about on this, but something that really struck me is that in this guidance, FDA made a very specific point of saying that age-gating technologies, like the ones you're just talking about, were not enough to get an authorization over the goal line. And then yet 3-4 weeks later, that's the exact thing they hung the hat on when it came to the glass approval.
I mean, they would probably argue that the glass application had more than device access restrictions. But I mean, what that looked like to me was a sort of compromise. Half the FDA, CTP, maybe the scientists say, well, obviously, if it's got device access restrictions, we can hardly, how secure does it have to be? I mean, a cigarette pack doesn't have that. None of the illicit products have that. It's a barrier. It's more expensive. No one's going to buy it who's under 21. It's just ridiculous. Why would they go to the trouble when they don't have to? And then the other side of the FDA, maybe the Macari faction, which says, well, we don't want to authorize any flavored products under any circumstances because that's our de facto policy, even if we're not saying that. And so they come up with some fudged language in the middle that says, well, device access restrictions may help, but they're not enough in themselves, which gives them, as always, FDA, complete kind of discretion to do whatever they feel like. They're not bound by any principles or consistency or anything that says in these circumstances you should authorize the product and in these circumstances you shouldn't. They're never that precise. So once again, the industry's left guessing, well, should we do device access restrictions or not? If they say it helps, how much does it help? How does it lessen the other burdens of the application? All of which is completely impenetrable in the guidance, and there is no specific language on any of that. So it was deeply, deeply unhelpful, the guidance.
So one of the characteristics that's kind of mentioned strongly in the guidance is this comparative efficacy standard. What is that?
So the idea, I mean, it's a thoroughly flawed idea, but the idea is that because flavored products appeal more to young people, then you have to show that there is some compensating benefit to adults in that it's more likely to make adults quit than just tobacco flavor. Okay. And that's called the comparative efficacy test. So you have to show that the flavored product will help more adults quit than just a standard tobacco flavored product. Now, the whole thing is nonsense on stilts. Tobacco flavor is just a flavor. It's nothing special about it. It's just one flavor of many. So it's unclear why that should be the standard. It's not even clear. I mean, if young people, you say, okay, young people choose flavored products. Well, so do adults. The most popular products amongst adults are fruit flavors, candy flavors, pastry, bakery type flavors. Adults also don't find tobacco flavors particularly appealing. So these products, people buy them because of the flavors. That's true of adults and young people. And then you've got, well, when young people vape, I mean, everybody assumes it's a bad thing in sort of population health terms. But actually, the history in the United States is that that's not the case. The vaping has almost entirely displaced smoking. And most of the vaping that we see in the United States at the moment is beneficial from a public health point of view compared to the case where there was no vaping or the counterfactual. So if there'd been no vaping, a lot of the kids, if the products had never been invented, a lot of the kids now vaping would be smoking. And that is a way you should think about the appropriate for the protection of public health test, because the nicotine market is migrating from high-risk products to low-risk products. And that is happening more among younger people than it is among older people. Okay, so the problem we actually have is with older people who are not switching rather than younger people who are switching, but they're switching at the point of initiation rather than smoking first. And, that's just a different way of looking at it.
Clive, is it fair to ask whether you think that public health, tobacco control is untethered from reality?
There's absolutely no doubt about it. They're completely untethered from reality, and that's true of the campaign organisations that hover around the the FDA and the Congress. It's also true of the FDA itself. I mean, they're making regulatory determinations as if the illicit market for vapes doesn't exist. Yet at least 80% of the vapes that are sold in the United States are not authorized products. So, when FDA sets a really high bar for authorizing products, what happens? It doesn't mean that no one uses a product. It means, oh well, okay, I can't use it because I don't, there's no product available for me to use that I want. What it means is that people just go and buy them through illicit trade. They go and buy them on the black market. So if they're trying to do what's appropriate for public health, if the main effect of your intervention is to do two things probably. One, drive people into the black market, and two, encourage them to continue smoking or take up smoking instead of vaping. If that's what you're doing, then how is that appropriate for the protection of public health? And so when I say they're untethered from reality, I think what it means is that they're using a model of public health that doesn't include two really important things. The first, that everybody who wants to can pick up a black market product that is unregulated, of unknown safety, of unknown origin, of unknown age, of unknown risks, of unknown chemical contaminants, and so on. Doesn't mean they're dangerous, but it means you don't know. And then secondly, you may be getting a rebound effect in some way to smoking. If people feel, well, I can't buy the products I want, or I've tried one of these authorized products that FDA allows to go into convenience stores, but I didn't like it, and the reason I didn't like it is it's like 10 years out of date. And that's another problem with FDA, is that everything is now totally out of date compared to what the market leaders are. So if you want an up-to-date product, you have to go to the illicit market because the FDA authorized products are all way out of date. Giving people a bad experience with vaping by forcing them to use essentially obsolete products, how does that help convince people that vaping is a good pathway out of smoking? So they don't think in this way. They're not thinking about the market environment and the real world consumers and suppliers that are in the market. They think they've got control over a few big companies that make the vapes that have got through their PMTA process, and the rest of it is somehow irrelevant. But it's not irrelevant from a public health point of view. It's absolutely central to a public health point of view. And if you ignore it, there's no other conclusion. You are untethered from reality. And it's the same, again, the campaign for tobacco-free kids, okay? Clear the market of unauthorized vapes is their kind of, that's their sort of watchword, their call to action. Nobody seems to have ever asked them what would happen if you did that. What, in the unfortunate and unlikely event you were successful, what would actually happen? Now, there's about 20 million adults who are using unauthorized vapes. What do they think those people would do if they suddenly disappeared? Would they all go and buy the 10-year-old obsolete, unflavored products that are available via authorized sources? Or would they go back to smoking? What about the people who dual use, who smoke and use cigarettes at the same time? Maybe they go, well, yeah, that was nice. I can't get those anymore. I'll just go back to smoking. They have never had their feet held to the fire over that claim, not by their own internal management, not by their boards, not by the media, not by any politicians, and certainly not by FDA. But the question is, what would happen if you got your way, is not one they can answer. And therefore, I would say they too are untethered from reality.
Clive, I've got some numbers here that should astonish our viewers. This is the Global Illicit E-Vapor Market Report from Euromonitor International. According to the report, the annual global nicotine vape market is roughly $62 billion USD, and out of that, $47 billion annually is illicit. That means 76% of the entire global nicotine vape market is illicit. What do you make of that?
Oh, well, I've seen that report. It's astonishing. And I think that report says that something like 1/3 of the consumers of vaping products worldwide live in countries where vapes are prohibited, completely prohibited, not even like in the way they are in the United States, completely outlawed. So everyone using vapes in those countries is using an illegal product. I mean, the products themselves may be legal in other jurisdictions, and they may be perfectly good products, but they are illegal in those countries where they're sold, and there's no regulatory supervision. So if you take somewhere like India, it's a huge population, there are no legal vapes in that country because there's a law from 2019 that says vapes and heated tobacco products are illegal. So these huge countries, everyone vaping is using an illegal product, and that's what contributes to that number. But 75% of a whole market being illicit, that's insane. And yet you go into the World Health Organization meetings, you look at the World Health Organization documentation, it's always encouraging outright bans. And everybody in WHO and the Bloomberg NGOs that follow in its wake celebrate when there's a prohibition like that. And they're campaigning not only to make those prohibitions happen in the first place, but also to make them stick and make them go deeper and cover more products and more ways in which the products can be accessed. It's completely insane. I mean, sometimes I think you have to step back from this, Brent, and think, you know what these people are doing? There's been the invention of much safer products than the thing that we've all been worried about that kill 8 million people per year. They are against those much safer products and trying to get them banned. Now, when you just think about that, it's like, that's crazy. How do they get away with that? Why does nobody say, you must be insane? It'd be like, I don't know, it would be like, it'd be like saying, well, you can't have a nice, safe family car. Everybody has to ride, 750cc Harley Davidsons. It's like you can only use the most dangerous thing in this country. What it's you have to stand back from it. I mean, when you talk to people who are non-combatants in this debate, just like ordinary people, your friends or whatever, you explain that, they look at me with a kind of puzzlement. It's like, well, how does that work? How do they get away with that? Doesn't anyone say, I'm sorry, you're mad, we can't pay any attention to you? But that's what they should say, because it's a really, really ridiculous position to hold. And it's not, obviously it's not just it's not just outright prohibitions. It's flavor bans, it's nicotine limits, it's taxes, it's the fact that there's monopolies that restrict access to products and so on. So, there's a whole range of reasons why this illicit trade happens. But 3/4 of the global vape trade is illegal. How did that happen? And who's taking responsibility? Who's taking responsibility for that? That's a huge amount of money. I can't remember. You read out a number, it's like $47 billion or something, nourishing criminal networks. How did that happen?
Well, let me say that the U.S. nicotine vape market is the largest in the world by leaps and bounds. So this means, so a massive portion of the 47 billion in annual illicit sales is happening in the United States.
I think I've seen something. It would be about a third, I guess. So I think I've seen numbers around 15 billion is the UK, the US illicit market. And of course, in volume terms, even more because, illicit products sell for less than, legal products. That's just a feature of illicit markets.
So Euromarket International, speaking about this, is saying that the fast-growing illicit nicotine vape market is basically using up all of the oxygen for growth and suffocating the legal market.
Yeah, that has to be true. And whenever I talk to the companies, they who seem immensely complacent about this, my message to them is you are obsessed with market share. You're obsessed with getting your share of the 25% that isn't, off limits. You should be focused on market access and tackling all of these drivers of illicit trade, whether it's prohibitions, partial prohibitions, restrictions, costly evaluation process. Like the US thing is just compliance burdens are insane, taxation, whatever, because that's what's driving the market into illicit hands. And it is basically leaving no incentives for legal, law-abiding companies to invest in the sector, develop new innovation, and get legal products onto the market. I mean, that doesn't stop the Chinese companies, of course, highly innovative and very, very prepared to have their products flowing down illicit channels. So they have, I would say, extremely good engineering and design capability. Their scientists and engineers are focused on figuring out what the consumer wants. In the United States, the scientists and engineers are focused on compliance and figuring out what FDA wants, which isn't the same thing as the consumer. So the Chinese companies are extremely competitive, and then they're willing to have their products misdescribed and channeled into illicit markets, which then completely destroy the legal market for regulated products, which are, in the case of the United States, inferior and out of date, because the process of evaluating them and authorizing them through the FDA takes so long and is so pedantic and restrictive that the last thing the consumer gets at the end of that process is what the consumer wants. The Chinese provide what the consumer wants.
I remember back in 2018, 2019, when a lot of the independent vape market people that own retail stores and stuff like that were rightly upset about disposables hitting the market. But for me, there was this in the back of my mind is that they're not going to be able to stop this, and these disposables are going to save access to vaping products for the regular
Yeah,
consumer.
I mean that's right, and I remember that era as well. So just suddenly everybody became an environmentalist and a waste management expert. So it's, but the problem is they were successful because the consumer wanted them. That's how markets work. They were bought because they met a particular consumer need. And I would put them at the opposite end of the spectrum that the glass products have with all the, device locking, smartphones, apps, Bluetooth, and age gating. Those are super complex to use, okay, for a consumer product. Opposite end of the spectrum. So if you're, low income, I don't know, you work on a construction site, you're a security guard, or, you're working in different circumstances or whatever, difficult circumstances, the disposable vape solves a bunch of problems for you. It's not complicated to use. It's affordable. You just buy it in the same way you used to buy cigarettes. You don't need an upfront investment. There are some circumstances in which the more fancy devices can't be used and everything. So it solved a lot of problems, and that's why they were popular. Not necessarily the optimum choice for a vapor, but they worked for some people in some circumstances. And while we're on the subject of disposables, we had a result in the UK which banned disposable vapes in 2025, June 2025. And there was a survey by Ash and YouGov which showed that 13% of those surveyed who were users of these disposable products had increased their smoking as a result. And that would be around 340,000 people in the UK, which is more than 3 times the number of people going through the UK smoking cessation services every year. So, everybody got behind it. We don't want litter. We don't like all the mess. It's a messy way of doing things. But, maybe the end of smoking is a bit messy. Get over it. It's the end of smoking.
Clive, back to the illicit market. Can the U.S. levy enough force to curtail the illicit market?
Well, no. I mean, we know that from the drugs markets. If look at the amount of force that's gone into trying to prevent cannabis, cocaine, opioids, and so on. I mean, you're right up there with, spraying fields in Colombia, helicopter gunships, explosives to blow up plants and everything. You've got, just spend a couple of days watching Narcos, the Netflix series. You get a sense of how it all works. I mean, I know it's fantasized, but it hasn't been successful. And if you take cannabis use in 12th grade, so this is from the Monitoring the Future study, you see that cannabis use at 12th grade, past 30-day use, has hovered around 20% for the last 25 years. So if we're so great at enforcement, how come it hasn't stopped cannabis being so widely used? 5%, 5 to 6% daily use. It's tailed off a bit recently, but probably nothing to do with enforcement or force, just something to do with the way kids are changing more than the way the authorities are responding. And it's the same worldwide. Enforcement has its place. You round up bad guys, you seize contraband and everything, but it does not affect the supply as much as people think it does. I mean, I use this example, Brent, which is I go shopping at a supermarket in our town called Tesco's in Britain. If somebody was to bulldoze that to the ground next week, I would not starve. I would not starve. I would find somewhere else to go shopping. Another store would send me a leaflet saying, come to our store. There would be the opportunity to buy online. And eventually someone would build a new store in the place of the old one that had been bulldozed. And it's the same with illicit markets. The users don't just go, oh, my supplier has disappeared. I can't now do anything. That supplier will either get supply from somewhere else or there'll be a different supplier. So 2 million vapes seized, and you'll see men with guns sort of proudly showing that they've seized 2 million vapes in a container and there's bags of money and guns and everything. That does not mean that 2 million illicit vapes will not be sold. It means they will be sold via a different mechanism. The supply chain will refill from somewhere else. And that is, I think, one of the pernicious deceptions of enforcement theatre. You have these sort of showy events and moments, and we had one with Macari and some of the others showing that they'd busted a warehouse. Did it make the slightest difference to the level of illicit trade in the United States? I don't think so. There probably are things that do make a difference, that create more friction. Local level retail action probably is more effective than upstream measures, but it's not stopping the trade.
Clive, there's been a lot of talk this past year in the European Union about eradicating nicotine entirely. Like, got to get rid of it. Tell us about what's going on in the EU.
Well, I think that is part of a worldwide trend in the tobacco control community. And remember, when I say the tobacco control community, don't think in terms of a gigantic operation. I mean, there's probably, let's say 10,000 people in the tobacco control community, of which probably about 100 or so set the tone and set the agenda, and everybody else is a follower of some sort. Okay. So a relatively small number of people have noticed that it's possible to use nicotine in a way that's much safer and leaves them nothing to do. There's no role for them in this. It's a free market transaction largely. Innovators produce vapes or pouches. People of their own free will and in their own interest use their own money to go and buy them. There's no tobacco control or regulator. There's no need for a punitive, coercive, or stigmatizing intervention to stop that. In fact, it would be harmful if there was. So what they've moved on to doing is problematizing nicotine. It's like, well, we should now make nicotine the problem. This is now a drug issue rather than a harm issue. And let's be clear, whatever they say, the harm is predominantly caused by inhalation of smoke products, smoke from burning tobacco. That's what causes the harm. That's not changed since Michael Russell made his quote back in 1976, people smoke for the nicotine but die from the tar. That is true more or less today. Nicotine is not entirely benign. There are other things in vapes that might be a bit harmful, but in terms of an order of magnitude difference, it's the smoke that makes the difference. So they're moving away from that. They say less and less about that, even though there's 8 million people dying a year and 1 billion people smoking worldwide a year. They are, 1 billion people smoking. They are focused on the 100 million, 120, 130 million or so that are taking up new forms of nicotine use. It's absolutely insane, in my view, that they are in complete denial about harm reduction, the market migrating from high risk to low risk products. They don't want that to happen. It leaves them nothing to do and no locus. It renders their preferred policies irrelevant and pointless. Whereas what we should be doing is shaping a market that encourages that migration. There's a lot of them in Europe, but there's also quite a few in the United States as well. So it's not a purely European phenomenon. And, frankly, around the World Health Organization, you find that view also to be quite common.
Clive, the Pacific Island nation of Palau just triggered a United Nations process to initiate a WHO scientific review of nicotine. What's that all about?
Well, it can't be what it seems. Okay, so Palau, Pacific Island state, very well connected with international conventions because they have the same number of votes as a superpower in an international convention. So this is a place where the leaders of a small country like that can really, make a splash on the international stage. Population is about 18,000 of Palau, which is about the same as my town. And they have used a mechanism in one of the illicit drug treaties, the 1973 Convention on Psychotropic Substances. So it's not just a reference about nicotine, and let's find out what's bad about nicotine. It's a reference through a convention whose main instrument is prohibition. So this is the treaty convention that is used to underpin drug prohibition for, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and a long list of other substances. So the aim would be ostensibly to have it listed in one of the schedules of one of these conventions, and have it sort of prohibited or restricted in some way. And that would be a complete disaster. It's completely insane. So I don't think that that is likely to be their aim. I think it is to create some noise by triggering a process that allows WHO to write a report that says this substance is addictive and a problem, and just to lend weight to the idea that these prohibitions that are happening at national level are a reasonable policy response. So I think that's what they're up to. I think it's despicable. It's like so contemptuous of, there's 1.3 billion users of nicotine. It's a relatively innocuous drug. I mean, people don't get violent. They don't have accidents. There's no oblivion. There's no hallucinations. People don't lose their work. They don't, crash cars. It's a mild stimulant that people use to relax, to, calm their anxiety, to feel a little bit sharper. In the grand scheme of drugs, it's ridiculous to be using an instrument like that. And the people doing it, completely unscrupulous. It looks like a false flag operation. It's very opaque about who's behind it. I mean, they say who did the work, but who paid the money, who did the initiative. Their website, everyone, it's all redacted for privacy, who set that up and who's paid for it and everything. There's no need to redact for privacy when you're taking a public initiative. You should be displaying for transparency, not redacting for privacy. And then there's, just the sense, I call it philanthrocolonialism, that some philanthropist here is frustrated that he, Michael Bloomberg or Bill Gates or whoever it is, and I don't know exactly who it is, doesn't have the full power of a nation state. They can't go to conventions and, vote and, raise initiatives. So what do? They find a nation state in the Pacific that is willing, either for money, for fame and reputation, or for favors of some sort, to give up their sovereignty, pawn it over to a philanthropist, which will then pull the strings behind them as they raise their flag and make their speeches and so on in these fora. It's despicable. I just find it the most disgusting way of NGOs carrying on. It's so disrespectful. It's so obvious what they're doing. I mean, it will all be wrapped in the language of aspiration, and we want to be a leader, and we want to speak truth to power and all that. But actually, it's capture by big money philanthropy.
It's nauseating.
Yeah, it's nauseating. That's a polite way of putting it.
Clive, going into the summer, what's your message then for those in Europe and maybe the FDA?
Okay, Europe first. We have a European Commission that has swallowed the Kool-Aid and is now going down a very aggressive prohibitionist route. It's aligning itself closely with WHO. It is considering measures that are absolutely certain to fail. Flavor bans, high taxes, plain packaging, a whole range of measures that will put the brakes on harm reduction. The most likely response to that will be illicit trade will mushroom in Europe. We have plenty of awful organized crime syndicates in Europe who will be very grateful for the opportunity. And it will, I mean, 24% of Europeans, 100 million people, are smoking. So it's going to slow down the migration of the European nicotine market from high risk to low risk products. It'll do far more harm than good, but they'll do it because they're not really interested in the results. They're just interested in performative policy. European consumers, public health advocates need to saddle up and get ready for a big battle between now and the sort of first half of next year. Join consumer groups, redo your membership, set one up if you don't know of one or can't find one, and get ready for a struggle. I mean, we will win. Good sense will prevail, but it will require a big effort on the part of everyone who has a legitimate stake in this, which is millions of people who use nicotine. And we will see off the few thousand people who want to try and ban everything and make everybody's life miserable. Message for the FDA is you are the problem. And the sooner you realize that, the better. You are the reason there is a gigantic black market. You are the reason that people are forced to buy adults are forced to buy the products that they want from illicit suppliers, from the Chinese and so on. You are the reason that slowing down the migration of older adults from high-risk products to low-risk products because they don't like buying from the black market. They want to buy in normal shops and they can't get good products that way. You're the reason why American companies can't compete. You're making them wait years for authorizations. Their products are all obsolete by the time they get on the market. You're the reason that's costing them millions of dollars and making it impossible to join that market. Takes so long and costs so much. Only the biggest possible companies will do it. And until they internalize that and realize that in a three-cornered fight between legitimate safer products, illegal products, and cigarettes, FDA has its fingers on the scale in favor of the smoking market and the illegal market. And until they realize that and put that right, by changing the way they authorize these products, nothing is going to change. It's only going to get worse.